it seems necessary to find out what is the difference between knowing and understanding before we proceed to look at the theme of what the obstacles and difficulties are in the growth of understanding. We live by knowledge and experience, and we are constantly busy knowing about the world. That is to say, the brain would like to have information about an object as soon as the senses come into contact with that object. The brain feels uneasy unless it has organized information. Knowledge is organized information. Put it in an order. Unless the information is organized in such a way that it makes some sense, it has some meaning, the brain feels restless. So it is a cerebral activity. Now how does the brain know? Either it refers back to memory to find out if the information has already been fed into it. If it finds that the information is there, it refers to it, and the playback of memory is called knowing or knowledge. If the information has not been fed into the brain, then the brain looks around. The person looks around. Read books. Go and ask someone. Get the necessary information. Store it in memory and then say, I know it. Organized information collected by the brain, stored into memory, is what we call knowledge. So a cerebral activity which requires the help of words, either as a part of inheritance or as something acquired, assimilated. So cerebral activity, help of words, and an activity that takes place in psychological time. These three things seem to be necessary parts of what we call knowing. And this activity of knowing, assimilating what is known and converted into memory, converting events into experiences, is a very necessary part of human life. Without knowledge and without the skill in knowing and experiencing, it will be extremely difficult to live in the modern world. So there is a kind of authority of knowledge and knowing incorporated in the very psychological structure. So the way to know, to experience, refer to that experience, and respond according to the knowledge and experience is our way of living. There is an authority when an engineer refers back to his knowledge, or a doctor refers back to a knowledge. So we cannot rule out the necessity of knowing or knowledge. It is limited and it is relevant to a limited area of activity. But when we turn to religion or spirituality, it seems that this activity of knowing or the resourcefulness of knowledge doesn't take us very far. You may read books about how to drive a car, how to drive an aeroplane, a spacecraft, how to work with a robot, how to operate with a computer, and one can do it. The authority of knowledge there is relevant. But if somebody says, I have read books about what God is, what divinity is, I have read books regarding or referring to Hindu philosophy, I have read Muslim scriptures, I have read Old Testament, New Testament, books on Judaism, and I know about God. And the person may know perhaps dozens of theories of what God is or God can be. What difference does it make to the life of that person, to the quality of his relationship with other human beings, to the state of his mind in waking consciousness or in sleep? When you have knowledge about driving a car, the difference is you can drive a car and the other person who hasn't the knowledge can't do it. That difference is there. You know how to cook a meal and the other person does not know. But supposing you have read books about the divinity, about what life is, death is, what is the ultimate nature of reality, and you know everything, Zen Buddhism or traditional Buddhism, you have read everything, and the memory has the wealth of knowledge. Does it necessarily make any difference in the quality of that person's life? Knowledge is organized information about some fact or about some object. There is no direct contact with the fact. It's not necessary to have a first-hand personal contact with the fact. You may sit here and read books about Australia, New Zealand, have more information about Australia and New Zealand than hundreds of persons. You need not go to those countries for having the information. Without having a first-hand personal contact with reality or with the facts, knowledge and knowing are possible. Is it possible to understand what God is or divinity is, what love or truth is, what peace or harmony is through theories? Is it possible to find out what the mystery of relationship is by reading books? That is the question relevant to this evening's inquiry. You and I are going to inquire. It's a participative inquiry. So we'll have to find out now what is understanding. Knowing is a cerebral activity, a partial, a fragmentary activity based upon information, inherited or borrowed or grafted, collected, etc. What is required that understanding can take place? Supposing you and I read a book about horses, different pedigrees of horses, and so on. and we know everything. But we have not seen a horse. We have never seen him from close quarters, never touched the horse. Will we ever be able to ride the horse? Will we ever be able to understand the horse and have a relationship? Understanding requires first a personal perception, first-hand perception. You have to see the animal. Not only in videos and movies or in books, but actually touch him, watch him, observe him, then have a contact with him. Ride the horse, and when your movement and the movement of the horse get together and become one movement, then after having that relationship with the horse, you might be able to say, I understand the horse. Knowing about the horse and understanding the horse, there is an immediacy of relationship. There is a perception, the contact, relationship, and then understanding. So, understanding is a movement of your whole being. It's a movement not only of the brain. The brain is included. The cerebral activity is not excluded from the realm of understanding. But it is not the foundation. The foundation is the sensitivity permeating the whole being. It's a movement of the totality. Personal, first-hand contact, relationship, and then understanding. So one is fragmentary and another is total. One requires words. Understanding may not require words. It's about 20 years ago, a friend of mine, a professor of sociology at Minnesota University, USA, came to Mount Abu, India to visit me. He had read many books about India and Indian people and had read that Indian people have faith in God. He wanted to find out if there was any truth in it. So he suggested that I take him to some rural area to meet some illiterate people, and he would like to have a kind of dialogue or conversation with them. So we drove about 50, 60 miles, and he saw a farmer, perhaps in his late 50s, plowing his field. And he stopped the car. We got down. We walked up to the farmer. And my friend asked him a question. Do you believe in God? The professor is asking an illiterate farmer somewhere in a village in Rajasthan, one of the most backward states of India, educationally, economically, industrially. I had to translate for the farmer. The farmer listened to the question, and there was a grin on his face. It was morning. The sun was shining bright in the Asian mysterious blue sky. He raised his hand and he said, do you have to believe in the sun? The professor had asked, do you believe in God? And the farmer says, do you have to believe in the sun? That is to say, do you have to believe in what you see? The necessity of belief comes in when you don't see something. Well, my professor friend was not satisfied. He thought the poor farmer had not understood the question. So he bent down and took a little clay from the field in his hands and said, look, this is matter. This is dead. And they said there is God. Do you believe in him? The farmer heard the words. The professor was throwing back the clay. The farmer caught it in his hand. He kissed it and he said, "Do you call my Mother Earth dead matter? Do you call this dead?" The professor had read books about divinity permeating the whole universe, omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, but they were words. And here was a poor farmer. I think such poor farmers, illiterate persons, could be found in many more countries, not special to India. But I refer to it because I was a witness to that event. So he said, "Why do you call this Mother Earth dead matter? Everything comes out of it." I am not going to take your time. Very poetically, that poor person with tears in his eyes, how he kissed the clay, how he referred to the earth, giving everything to mankind. Cereals, flowers, fruits, vegetables, everything. That is understanding. The farmer had a living contact with the earth, the sun, the skies, the rains, the sowing of the seeds and watching them growing, handling them fondly. It was a movement of relationship between him and life. And the other person had relationship with words. So there is a difference between knowing and understanding. Understanding requires that you are open, you are receptive, you are observing, you are looking. So through looking, through listening, through touching, through observing, you come into contact with reality. And that living contact blossoms into understanding. It's a movement of life. It's a result of some relationship and perhaps communion which is non-verbal. Now the theme this evening is, what are the obstacles in the growth of understanding? We have differentiated knowing from understanding. One is acquisitive. One is acquisitive movement. I want to know. I acquire knowledge. I store it in memory. So it is from the center of the me, an acquisitive tendency, then storing what is acquired, owning it as an experience, and then referring back to it. So knowledge is a response of memory. And understanding is a movement of the totality born out of the contact and relationship with reality. There is no intermediary between the person and life. If that is clear, let us proceed. Who wants understanding if the authority of knowledge is sufficient? It enables a person to live in society, and if people exchange only what they know, talk about it and discuss things based on knowledge, who has the urge to turn to understanding, which is not a verbal, academic or theoretical process, but which requires a movement towards life, of perception, of observation, of contact, of receptivity, etc. It seems to me that very few people feel the necessity of understanding anything at all. They are satisfied with knowledge. They are satisfied with second-hand lives. The urge to learn, to discover, to find out, to understand is so very rare. When you understand something, understanding leaves you no choice but to live that understanding. Knowledge leaves options open. You store the knowledge in memory. You talk about it when you want to discuss with people. There is no responsibility to live what you know. You may know about freedom, but that knowledge about freedom does not make it obligatory upon you to live as a free human being. You may know about attachment, detachment, no responsibility to set yourself free of attachment. You see, knowledge is sterile. It does not create any compulsion to implement it in life, to live the knowledge instantaneously. No responsibility. As you collect wealth, as people collect books, they may not study them, but they have books and libraries. So knowledge also is a piece of collection. You decorate the drawing room of memory with assorted collection of thoughts, ideas, theories, etc. and feel gratified, I have that. Understanding, on the other hand, has its own momentum. So it makes you restless. It creates an impulse to put it into life, to implement it, to translate into action. So understanding makes you feel rather uncomfortable. It has its own pressure. It has its own pulls and pushes. One doesn't like that. So one hardly turns towards understanding in one's life. One feels satisfied with knowledge. That's one thing. Secondly, when we turn to the field of religion or spirituality, it is the field of authoritarianism, much more than any other field of social activity. In most of the organized and institutionalized religions, they claim that enlightenment, liberation, transformation, mutation is not for all the people. It is for the chosen few. It's the privilege of the few. It's very difficult, not for all. The priests, the masters, the teachers, they say it is so difficult. So the majority has believed for thousands of years that relationship with the divine and transformation are not for us. We only worship those few and rare individuals who are lucky enough to have that. You admire them, you adore them, you worship them, you follow them, and you carry on with your own daily living according to the traditions in which you have been brought up. So the human mind suffers from a kind of inferiority complex when it comes to the issue of God or divinity or unconditional freedom or transmutation, psychic revolution, enlightenment. Oh, it is for some Buddha, some Confucius, for some Socrates, some Jesus of Nazareth, not for all of us. That inhibition is there. So instead of inquiring, one feels that to be religious is to gather information, gather knowledge, perhaps acquire some transcendental experiences. Nothing more than that. So the urge for understanding is so rare because of this heavy conditioning through centuries by the organized religions and institutions. So people even don't feel sad about it. They feel that it has to be so. So that conditioning is an inhibition. First thing, if at all they understand, Understanding leaves no choice but action, immediate action. It makes you restless. So they find a refuge in this heavy conditioning, which tells them that it is not within your reach. You go to temples, to mosques, to synagogues, and listen to beautiful sermons, donate your money, and there's an end to it. So the urge for freedom, the urge for understanding is extremely rare. Let us please face this fact very clearly. Who wants the growth of understanding? Who wants to be free? A friend of mine was traveling in Persia years back, and he was a guest in a very rich person's house. In the living room was a beautiful cage, a lovely little cage in which a parrot was kept. And the owner of the house had taught the parrot to shout, "Freedom, freedom, freedom." When anybody entered the room, the parrot would shout, "Freedom, freedom." Now this friend of mine heard that parrot 1 day, 2 days, and felt very sad for the parrot. So third day, before going to bed, he opened one of the windows of the living room, opened the door of the cage, and went to his room feeling rather satisfied that he had opened the doors to freedom for the poor little parrot. Next morning he wakes up and he goes to the living room. Again he hears the words freedom, freedom. The door of the cage was open. The window was open. The parrot was sitting there tight in the cage shouting freedom, freedom. Is it only with the parrot, or is it so with all of us? Do we want freedom? Do we want understanding? Do we want the responsibility? When you understand, you are responsible for every action that you take. Do we want to be responsible human beings, owning the responsibility of thoughts, of actions, of reactions? Or we rather prefer basking in the immaturity, saying, I am not responsible for what I have done. I have done it because society says it should be done thus. I did it because of my inheritance. I did it because of my conditionings. Nobody wants the maturity to own the consequences, to face the consequences of one's actions. So, if they have understanding, then there will be no choice left but to own the responsibility. So it is better to live with knowledge, repeat the knowledge, repeat the words, and leave the responsibility to someone else. The urge for security in this psychological field, to feel that one is the poor, wretched victim of history, of society, of everyone else, is a very comfortable thing. So the urge for understanding and its growth may not be there with us. The urge for freedom may not be there with us. Intellectually we appreciate the idea of freedom. Intellectually we appreciate the idea of choiceless awareness, choiceless action. The words attract us. They thrill us. What a beautiful state of spontaneity or choiceless awareness. They stir certain emotions. But we love our attachments, we love our preferences, prejudices, so we talk about freedom, and we cherish and nurse our likes and dislikes, preferences, prejudices. In daily living, in relationship, it's the movement of likes and dislikes. It's the movement of comparisons and evaluations, and we talk about freedom. Intellectually we feel we want freedom, emotionally we prefer not to be free. Let us face the facts. Understanding is not difficult to come by. It's a very simple thing. It's born of the communion with life. We are living in the midst of life. So it's not difficult to come by, but it's very secure and very comfortable to live on the level of verbal, theoretical, academic knowledge and not to turn towards the exposure that takes place in understanding. If these points are clear, let us proceed to one more obstacle. And that obstacle is fear. If I live my understanding and I see that my relatives do not live that way, my neighbors do not live that way, they live the secure way of tradition, following the traditions, authority of the past. They are following patterns which have been cultivated, handled. It's very easy. They are moving that way. And I stand here with the tiny, tender sapling of my understanding after investigation and inquiry. So I feel insecure to live that understanding. I like the romance of investigation, exploration, experimentation. I like the sensation of understanding. But now that understanding will not be able to sustain itself unless I live it. The movement of life nourishes understanding. But when it comes to living, I want to be secure, so I follow the patterns. Don't we do that? We are afraid of society. Society lives and follows violence. It follows, it glorifies money, wealth, property, it respects people who are rich, etc., etc. So there is a fear of being isolated from the society. What will people call me? What will my colleagues in the office call me? They'll say he has gone crazy or she has gone crazy. So the fear of society prevents us from living our own understanding. As there is the authority of knowledge, there is authority of fear. When there is not such an authority of fear, then the understanding transforms the life of a person. There is a person called J. Krishnamurti, a senior citizen and perhaps one of the most remarkable human beings of the century. And he was chosen when he was about 14, 15 years of age as the vehicle for reincarnation of Maitreya or Jesus or Buddha, I don't know, but as a vehicle for some world teacher to enter his body, carry on the work. Millions and millions of dollars or sterling was poured at his feet. The adoration, the adulation, properties and followers over so many continents. And the young, poetic, sensitive, alert gentleman was feeling restless in his shoes. He knew he was Jiddu Krishnamurti and not incarnation of someone. And he stood up one day in 1929 and said, look here, I am not any incarnation of some world superior power or Buddha or Maitreya or what have you. I am a simple person, Jiddu Krishnamurti. I have a song to sing. I would like to see that the human beings get unconditionally free. So take back your properties and money. You have given them to world teacher. I am not that. He was not afraid of what the whole Theosophical Society would think of him. He was not afraid that people might take back property and what will happen to him. Would he be rendered penniless? He just stood up and did it. When you are dedicated to your own understanding, then that understanding makes you fearless. But if we are not dedicated to the understanding, we like the romance of understanding and carry the authority of knowledge. We like the romance of understanding, but we carry the fear of society. Then I think we sow the seeds of many a misery and suffering in our life. Understanding cannot grow unless there is a dedication to that understanding. By dedication, I mean the willingness to live it at any cost and every cost, without a time lag, to live it instantaneously. That is more sacred. A sense of sanctity, sacredness about one's own understanding. You may investigate, you may explore, you may discuss, you may do all sorts of things. You may observe, but once the understanding takes place, if you choicelessly live it without a time lag, then it changes the quality of life. I don't know where many a serious inquirers would have been if a person called J. Krishnamurti had not taken that step. Now, he can take that step, why can't we? In our little lives, in our limited and relative fields, why can't we live our own understandings without fear? And we say, well, we verbally understand, we intellectually understand, and yet our lives are not changed. The lives do not change because we understand verbally. Let the verbal understanding be in one corner of memory, and we carry on following and repeating the old patterns and conditionings. It's our own making, as far as I can see. The authority of knowledge, the restlessness that understanding creates, the fear of society, the fear of tomorrow, what will happen to me? All these are obstacles in the growth of understanding. Let us proceed and look at the same issue from a different angle. By observation, sitting in silence, by observation, I notice my distortions or perversities or my weaknesses. I notice them, I see them, I understand them as they are. Now what do I do with them? Do I remain defenseless and innocent in the presence of that perception, in the moment of that perception? No. I immediately jump and justify or defend them. So, Because I don't like to feel that I am responsible for the weaknesses, for the lustfulness, for the obsessive sexuality, for the lust for money or greed for food. I don't like to feel responsible. So I observe, I see, and immediately I get busy finding out the cause, the reasons, the causes, the immediate cause, the distant, remote cause. Analyze it and enter into justification or defense, so that the understanding is brushed aside and I get busy. This activity of defense and justification prevents the growth of understanding. I may not be busy justifying or defending it, but honestly, inwardly, I know that those weaknesses of mine give me some pleasure, and I want that pleasure. Outwardly I say I don't want. Outwardly I say I want freedom, I want peace, or I want transformation, and inwardly I like to cling to things. I haven't got the honesty to say openly that I love pleasure, I want to retain that pleasure, therefore I am retaining the habit patterns or conditionings. Outwardly I say I would like to get transformed, transcend the weaknesses. Inwardly I cling to the pleasure and really want those things to continue in me. So I divide myself into two. One part wants to cling to those weaknesses, those bondages, those limitations, for whatever reason. And on the other hand, intellectually I profess, I even begin to believe that I really want transcendence or transformation. Conditionings, patterns, habits give much pleasure. They do not only give security, but it's so easy to follow a habit. You don't have to exercise intelligence. You don't have to be attentive. So repeat it. There is a pleasure in inattentiveness. You just do it automatically. It saves your energy and time. So the pleasure in the conditionings is something the mind clings to, and therefore, on one hand, intellectually it wants to understand, emotionally there is a resistance to that understanding being put into practice. Please, if we observe our lives and what actually factually happens, we will see how there are inner resistances to implement our own understandings into life. Fear of society we have referred to, but from the outer we have now entered the inner. And these inner inhibitions, inner resistances are best known to us. No one else can find them out. They are in the privacy of our own depth of heart. So one creates a world of make-believe, talks very enthusiastically about mutations and revolutions, and one is aware what freedom is. That may turn everything topsy-turvy. It may take away everything from me. It will make me stand in the nudity of that awareness, exposed to life, and I tremble. So I create a world of make-believe. So I create a world of make-believe intellectually and live in it. Then I say, oh well, this is very difficult for us common people, as if life and living are not for common people. This is the era of common people like you and me. In politics we talk about democracy. In economics we talk about exploitation-free society. But as soon as we turn to religion or spirituality, somehow we give sanction to authoritarian traditions, conditionings and exploitations and make-believes and what have you. And we become dependent. And we become dependent. We create authorities if there are none. Carve them out. So my friends, it is the authoritarianism ingrained in our blood. It's the fear and urge for security. It is the clinging to pleasure, which are really the obstacles and difficulties in the growth of understanding. When you turn to religion or spirituality, knowledge is the greatest obstacle in understanding. It has relevance in the material world, on the sensual level. But with the unknown, with the unnameable, immeasurable reality, knowledge has no role to play. It is only understanding that has some relevance. It's personal discovery through learning which has a relevance in the field of religion or spirituality. You know what I mean by religion is? To be religious is to be committed to life and living. To be committed to life and living is to have the willingness to relate to the totality of life. We are committed to physical, to mental pleasure. We are committed to property, to ownership. We are committed to acquisitiveness. We are committed to so many things, very rarely to life and living. So the crisis is in the individual psyche. The roots of authoritarianism are there. And therefore, though thousands and thousands in different parts of the world engage themselves in intellectual inquiries, verbal inquiries, pursuit of knowledge, we come across few who dare live their understanding, belonging to the truth that they understand. Dedicated to the truth that they understand. And then, if a Socrates is handed a cup of poison for sharing his understanding with the people, he drinks it without a grudge. His friends had suggested that he should escape from the prison. And he said, no, this is an opportunity to find out what it is to die. Until the last moment he was watching what was happening to his body. He said, I don't know what is death. Let me find out. So he was communicating with his friends, how the feet were becoming numb, how the numbness was reaching upwards. The last dialogue with Socrates is worth reading. Life becomes meaningless without living the understanding that has taken place. Come what may. Whether it's Jesus of Nazareth, whether it's a Socrates, or whether it's a Mahatma Gandhi, or Dr. Martin Luther King, so we have to ask ourselves a basic question: do we want to live? Do we want to discover what it is to live? Do we want to learn and understand and live that understanding? Or is it only an intellectual curiosity, satisfied by knowing about these things, and then we live the way mankind has been living? Shall we have a break for a few minutes?